Hello everyone. So, if you're here, it means that we have already tackled the theoretical session together with Professor Natalia, and this is going to be the first instance in which you will see how to analyze different type of sentences and the points that are needed in a comparative contrastive analysis. In this case, we're going to see together two analyses, one of an it sentence and another one with a there, both pronouns functioning as grammatical subjects. These exercises were taken from page 49, exercise 4, and page 50, exercise 1. So, let's start. Great, so the first sentence reads, "It won't be easy to get a ticket for the concert." This was the original sentence in English, and you were expected to produce a Spanish rendition, in this case of an isolated sentence. No será fácil conseguir una entrada para el concierto. This is our rendition of the English counterpart. So, first, we're going to analyze the syntax. As regards syntax, we see that we have a to infinitive clause in English or a oración no flexionada de infinitivo, in the case of Spanish, which is functioning as postponed subject, or the subject which is post-verbally located in both instances. The fact that the subject is post-verbally located is due to the principle of end wait. We will see in a few weeks, when we start studying estructuras temáticamente marcadas, that complex and long constituents are normally placed towards the end of the sentences. In this case, think in which are the parts of speech that can normally function as subjects. Compare this to infinitive clause or the oración no flexionada de infinitivo with a noun, which is normally what we find in subject position. So, if we compare these two elements, we will see that a to infinitive clause or a oración no flexionada de infinitivo is a much more complex and longer constituent than a noun phrase. So, the placement of the subject after the verb is due to this principle. Then we find easy and fácil adjectives as part of speech, functioning as subject complement or complemento predicativo subjetivo obligatorio in the case of Spanish. And then we find the anticipatory it. In this case, this it, this pronoun in pre-verbal position, is classified as anticipatory it because it is anticipating the subject, the real subject that was placed at the end of the sentence. This anticipatory it is known as an expletive pronoun. Why an expletive pronoun? We have already seen, Professor Natalia has already tackled the meaning of an expletive pronoun. An expletive pronoun is a pronoun devoid of meaning that has a grammatical function. So, this expletive pronoun is needed in English because English is a non-pro-drop language. This means that in order to have a declarative sentence, or in order to consider a declarative sentence a grammatical sentence, it needs a subject in pre-verbal position. So we see then that this anticipatory it, this expletive pronoun, is functioning or is serving a grammatical function. So this is as regards syntax. We see that in English, as this is a non-prodrop language, the presence of an expletive pronoun is needed in order to consider the sentence a grammatical one. In the case of Spanish, when we have the subject in post-verbally located, there is no need to signal this movement by any element. Let's see what happens when we analyze argument structure. So we have analyzed syntax. So let's move now to the analyses of argument structure. When we analyze the argument structure of a sentence, we have to look for the predicate that is functioning as predicator. It means that we have to look for the element that is selecting for arguments. In this sentence, the predicate selecting for arguments, that is to say the predicator, is easy or fácil in the case of Spanish. In this pair of sentences, we see that we have a non-verbal predicate functioning as predicator, because it is the adjective, the one requiring the presence of specific arguments. We will see how many arguments then are required by this nonverbal predicate. Easy selects for only one argument. This argument selected for by easy is the subject, to get a ticket for the concert or conseguir una entrada para el concierto in the case of Spanish. This argument is serving or has a theta role. The theta role in this case is the one of theme. So, if we say that easy is a nonverbal, we have said that this is a nonverbal predicate because it is an adjective and that it selects for one argument. Then we have to classify the degree. The degree depends on the number of arguments selected for by the predicate. So in this case, this is a one-place predicate because there is only one argument selected for by easy or fácil. In the case of Spanish, we speak of un predicado monádico. So, what is the function of the verb to be or el verbo ser in Spanish? These verbs are the containers. They are acting as the container of the nonverbal predicate. This means that they are serving the function of containing this nonverbal predicate, which is the adjective, because in the verb is by verbs we can show mood and tense. So the grammatical notions of tense and mood can only be expressed in verbs. So the verb in this case is acting as container and is providing the grammatical elements that nonverbal predicates cannot provide. So once you have analyzed the syntax and the argument structure, you have to refer to correspondence. You have to tell us if the sentence in English and in Spanish, if you find correspondence or not. So in this case, we can see that as regards argument structure, in both languages we have a nonverbal predicate, which is a one-place predicate, selecting for one argument. The verb is acting as container. And in the case of syntax, we saw that in both languages, we have the subject that is post-verbally located. The only difference then lies on the presence of the expletive in English. Taking into account the type of language English is classified as. As English is classified as a non-pro-drop language, the expletive is needed in order to have a grammatical sentence. So, we can speak of correspondence at the level of syntax and at the level of argument structure, taking into account that due to the type of language English is classified as, the presence of an expletive is needed. Therefore, English is behaving due to, or is behaving as the type of language it was classified. Let's see now what happens when we move to another type of sentence. This sentence was taken from page 50 from your handbook, and it reads, "For in a mysterious city referred to as London, there lived a brother." We have produced the following Spanish rendition. En una ciudad misteriosa llamada Londres vivía un hermano. So, let's analyze the syntax the same way we did on the previous pair. We find here the presence of, again, the subject, the subject in post-verbal position, post-verbally located, but we find a noun phrase or a frase sustantiva, una frase sustantiva in the case of Spanish. So we see that in this case, the type of element is short and not that complex, as in the case of the previous sentence. We find there, again, in this case, this there is classified as an existential there. A pronoun, this there is a pronoun, an expletive pronoun, and as we have said before, the expletive pronoun is a pronoun devoid of meaning that serves a grammatical function. In this case, the function of subject, the grammatical subject of the sentence. And we have the verbs. In the case of English, the verb live, which is an intransitive verb, and the verb vivir in Spanish, which is a verbo intransitivo. You see on the slide that I have classified the intransitive verb as a verb of stance, and I will go back to that in a minute. You see that this pair of sentences can be classified as presentational sentences. We have already tackled during the theoretical session together with Natalia. This is on page 106 from the original chapter, La estructura de la oración simple, el sujeto y el predicado. We have seen that there are two types of sentences. Oraciones predicativas y oraciones presentativas, presentational sentences. In the case of presentational sentences, we find the subject in post-verbal position, and we find the subject, in post-verbal position, and we can interpret the sentence either as an event or as the introduction of an entity into discourse. In this case, we can see that this is a presentational sentence, and that it is functioning, or it can be interpreted as introducing an entity, a brother, into discourse. If we analyze English, this is taken from Grimberman-Quirk, from the existential sentences. The original page is 428, and the subsection I am referring to is 18.34. You have there the description of existential sentences with verbs other than be, the verb to be. The author explains that this type of constructions require an intransitive verb, which is the case of the verb live, and this type of verbs have a presentational meaning, a presentative meaning. And the author classifies or places the verb live within the type of verbs of stance, together with remain, stand, lie. If we go to the following section, 18.35, we will see that this existential sentence, or this presentational sentence, has a prepositional phrase functioning as an adverbial indicating place. This prepositional phrase functioning as adverbial is of the type of the one presented in subsection 18.35, in which we see that the presence of the adverbial in initial position can give way to have a sentence without the expletive pronoun there. So in this case, placing the expletive is an option. It's something optional. So we could have a sentence like, in a mysterious city referred to as London, lived a brother. We will see that in this case, we can also have, or we can speak of, a more basic counterpart of the sentence, meaning that, as I have said, we can get rid of this expletive pronoun. So instead of having, in a mysterious city referred to as London, there lived a brother, we can have the sentence, for example, a brother lived in a mysterious city referred to as London. So that's why we can speak of a more basic counterpart. So again, as in the previous example, we can see that as regards syntax, so far, the only difference between English and Spanish is the presence of the expletive pronoun. The presence of the expletive pronoun is required due to the type of language English is classified as, taking into account it is said to be a non-pro-drop language. It needs expletives filling in the subject slot in order to consider the sentence a grammatical sentence. As regards argument structure, as we did with the previous pair, we need to find which is the predicate functioning as predicator, the one that selects for the arguments. In this case, we see that the predicate functioning as predicator and selecting for arguments is a verb. Therefore, this is a verbal predicate. This predicator selects for the argument subject, un hermano, a brother, with the theta role of agent. There are some grammarians that consider that the verb live only selects for one argument, in this case the subject, the entity living. Therefore, we would consider live as a one-place predicate. selecting only for one argument. On the other hand, there are some other grammarians that consider the adverbial as another argument needed in order to complete the meaning of this verb. This other group said that the verb live selects for not only the entity living, but also the place in which the living takes place. So in this case, the adverbial would be another argument with the theta role of theme. So this sentence is going to be classified, sorry, not the sentence, the predicate is going to be classified as a two-place. In the case of Spanish, this is a predicado diádico. So, again, after analyzing the syntax and the structure, we have to state if there is correspondence or not between the languages. And we see that we have the same example. We see correspondence as regards argument structure because we have a verbal predicate selecting for two arguments. These arguments having the same theta role. And in the case of syntax, we have a postponed subject, we have an intransitive verb, a prepositional phrase functioning as adverbial. The only difference would be then the presence of the expletive pronoun. Once again, due to the type of language, English is classified as. So, the idea is that now that you have listened to our explanations, you write a paragraph focusing on all the ideas we have developed and try to make a paragraph with your own words using this meta language that we have included on the videos. And in case you have doubts, you can always go to your group on Google Classroom. You can even share your paragraph with the members of the group to see if your partners can add something to your analysis, and you can post questions there to debate among the members of the group. In case the helping students cannot help you out with your doubts, you can always post the question on the forum available for each of the classes. I hope I have been clear enough and hope to see you soon. Thank you.